Hello, I'm David Wells, the Principal Technical Program Manager within the Windows Cloud Endpoints team. I'm here to give some details on the security and management aspects of the recently announced Windows 365 Link. As you may have heard from our announcement at Ignite last November, Windows 365 Link is the first cloud PC device purpose-built to connect you to Windows 365. It's secure by design, simple to manage, with cloud-powered performance, and aligned with sustainability goals. In this session, I'll be going over some of the details regarding the device's security features, as well as giving a quick demo on how the device is configured and managed in Intune. Before we jump in, let me give you a quick intro to the device. On the front panel, there's a USB-A port and an audio jack for easy day-to-day access. The back panel includes two more USB-A ports, one USB-C port, a wired Ethernet, and the power connector. It also includes two full-size HDMI port and display port, so it can support dual monitor up to 4K each. And on the side, there's a slot for a Kensington lock to physically secure the device. It also has Wi-Fi 6E and Bluetooth 5.3, and its dimensions are 120 millimeters square by about 30 millimeters thick. This compact, fanless, lightweight design means you can place it almost anywhere, and it's easy to ship. So to set the stage on the secure by design approach with this device, let's take a quick look at Windows 365 endpoints in general. Today, you can use Windows 365 from almost anywhere, the Windows app or a web browser, such as on a Windows PC, a Mac, iPad, or even Android. And those endpoints can provide both local and cloud experiences depending on your requirements and needs. But when it comes to connecting to Windows 365, there's really two main functions an endpoint needs to execute: authenticating a user via Enter ID and connecting them to their cloud PC through an RDP client. So for customers who want their desktop experience only in the cloud, there's room to optimize the endpoint for these functions, which in turn can increase its security posture. Windows 365 Link is purpose-built to connect you to your Windows 365 cloud PC and nothing more. This focused intention enables the reduction in attack surface area of the endpoint through a smaller, focused, purpose-built OS. And with the endpoint's focused functionality, we can dial its security posture up to 11 without impacting usability. So let's look at the security features of Windows 365 Link across the stack. Starting in its foundation of the hardware and OS layers, security is on by default. The solution has a small Windows-based OS called Windows CPC that brings the least amount of windows needed to connect directly to Windows 365. To do this, we started with the most basic layers of the Windows platform and only added the required functionality needed for this experience, such as networking, Enter ID authentication, Bluetooth, etc. And doing so, we added the applicable Windows security features, which are included and enabled by default. Starting as foundation, there's a discrete TPM 2.0 chip establishing that hardware root of trust that the other security features on the stack are built on top of. This, coupled with the silicon-assisted security features like virtualization-based security and hypervisor-protected code integrity, help protect the kernel from malicious code injection. These, together with Secure Boot, enabled by default, ensures only authorized firmware and software can execute, providing strong protections from malware through the boot process and device execution. Now, the device also has BitLocker, which is enabled as soon as it's set up, providing further defense in depth. And none of these features can be turned off or disabled. Lastly, applicable Windows security baseline policies are enabled by default, so you don't need to think about setting them. As we move up the stack into the application and identity layers, here's more about what's not on the device. There are no local apps, no local data, and no local users with administrative rights, and no ability for end users to access the device's local storage. This ensures data and experiences stay in the cloud where you want them and not on the device. And there is a strict app control code integrity policy specifically defined for this endpoint that only allows the software needed for the solution to execute and nothing more. And it cannot be modified or disabled either. Lastly, we move through the identity layers into the cloud. The endpoint embraces passwordless. With no local users, the device only supports Enter ID, and there's no admin rights on the device. Windows 365 Link requires that your cloud PCs be configured for single sign-on in order to connect to it. These together can promote a truly passwordless device. As stated, the device is Enter joined, and it cannot be domain joined. And it is fully managed by Intune. And support for the device health attestation services via Intune's compliance policies means conditional access policies can be used, ensuring that only compliant devices can connect to your cloud PCs, providing security across the solution, from the device to the cloud PC. If you use Microsoft Defender in your environment, it also comes with the Microsoft Defender EDR sensor, enabling visibility to what is on the device and what's going on. The combination of this small OS, security on by default, and full cloud management provides a very high security posture for this endpoint. Now we'll move into the management story of the Windows 365 Link. Windows 365 Link is simple to set up and manage via Intune alongside the Windows 365 cloud PCs they connect to. Its small Windows-based OS means it's managed in the same way as other Windows devices, but that small OS also means a lot less configuration policies and decisions. Now let's walk through a demo. For this demo, we're going to go through the setup and management experiences of the Windows 365 Link device in Intune.
All right, I'm going to walk through the various things you want to check in your environment to make sure it's ready for the Windows 365 Link. Then I'll show you a quick video on how the out-of-box experience looks, and finally, what Windows 365 Link looks like in Intune and how to manage it. The first two things you want to check in your environment is that Join Devices to Entra and Intune Automatic Enablement is set, as these processes will happen automatically as part of the out-of-box experience. So let's take a look at where and how to check these configurations. Starting with Entra enrollment, we are at the Entra portal. We go into Devices, Device Settings, and here you'll see where you can set your Microsoft Entra Join registration. I currently have it set to all in this test environment. You can also use Selected, which you would assign it to a security group of people, but you need to make sure that whoever is going to be doing the out-of-box experience of the link is in that group. Also note that you'll see that Require Multi-Factor Authentication is turned off, or set to no, and that is because we are using a conditional access policy to enforce MFA per prescriptive guidance. And that becomes important for the Windows 365 Link, which we'll cover in a moment when we talk about the conditional access policies. Next, we'll look in Intune to check that Intune's automatic enrollment is set up. So if we go to the Intune portal, then we go into Devices and Enrollment, Automatic Enrollment. And this is very similar to Entra Join. You'll see that you have the ability to set the scope to either all or some. And again, if you choose some, the people that will be going through the out-of-box experience of the device need to be a member of the group that that's associated with. Okay, now that we've checked those two things, we're off to a good start. The third thing we'll want to do following the Link documentation is to create a device filter for the Windows 365 Link device. This can be very helpful when enabling the ability to filter for either including or excluding the Windows 365 Link devices from various policies in Intune. So to do that, we can go in the Intune portal to Devices, scroll down to Filters, and here is where we can create. Now you'll see that I already have one, but I'll walk through the creation process. So you go Create Manage Devices, name it, select the platform as Windows 10 and later, hit Next. The property you choose is Operating System SKU. Set the operator to equals. And the value, at the bottom here, it's WCPC or Windows CPC 210. By doing that, click anywhere, you'll see the rule syntax is populated. And at this point, you could, I'll even show you that it works because I happen to have a Link device within my environment. So you see that it had found it. You can progress to Next and hit Create. I won't do since we already have one. All right, the next thing to check is device enrollment restrictions. Here's where we have some choices depending on your company's processes. If you have device platform restriction policies in place limiting user-driven provisioning scenarios, specifically blocking personally owned devices, there are several options available to maintain the intention of these restrictions while still allowing users to complete the enrollment process of Windows 365 Link devices. Please note, since these devices are joined to Entra, they will be deemed corporate-owned once Intune enrollment is complete. But since the Windows 365 Link doesn't support autopilot at this time, Intune doesn't have the pre-registered information about the device and will initially see it as personally owned or unknown. All right, let's look at some options if you happen to have device enrollment and restrictions in place. First, I'll show you what I'm talking about. So if we go to Devices, Enrollment, Device Platform Restrictions, if you have a policy similar to this one, which I call block personally owned devices. If I look at the properties, assigned to all users, and the setting for personally owned devices is set to block. If we go back, we can look at some options to address that. Let's look at the first option, and that is corporate identifiers. We click into Devices Enrollment Corporate Identifiers. Here you can upload a CSV file of the device manufacturer, model, and serial number for Windows devices. This gives enough information to Intune to know about the device so that when the enrollment process begins, it does not see it as unknown or personally owned. Here you'll see I have an example of a file where I uploaded one linked device. It shows the manufacturer, the model, and the serial number. This is a good option if you want to let end users still go through the out-of-box experience on the device, but don't want to give them any permissions to allow enrollment of personally owned devices. Plus, it also somewhat aligns with the autopilot methodologies of pre-registering information into the environment before someone is allowed to enroll a device in the environment. The second option is using device enrollment managers, as we see here. A device enrollment manager is an attribute that you can assign to a selection of users, which will then allow them to bypass any device enrollment restrictions you may have in place around personally owned devices. As you can see here, I happen to have this attribute assigned to my test IT admin, Alex W. This is a good option if you are going to leverage your IT staff to be the ones to do the out-of-box experience, and you don't want to give end users any ability to enroll personally owned devices, as well as you don't want to take the time to build or create a CSV file with corporate identifiers. The last option is actually to augment your device enrollment restriction policy. So if we look at your device platform restriction policy, you can create a higher order policy for all users or a select set of users that would allow personally owned devices, but only if that device that's being enrolled is a Windows 365 linked device, using the device filter we created earlier. So here you'll see I have an example of that. If I click into this enrollment policy, if I look at the properties, you'll see that it's assigned to all users with a filter for using the Windows 365 linked devices filter I created earlier in an include mode with personally owned devices allowed. This means that anyone can bypass this restriction, but only if they're coming from a Windows 365 linked device. It's important to note that that policy has to be higher than any policy that may be blocking devices. Okay, the fourth thing to check is conditional access policies, which we can do at endpoint security, conditional access, and view policies. Remember earlier at the enter join verification step, I mentioned using conditional access policy to enforce MFA when joining devices versus the option of using the setting. Here is where we ensure that we have that policy in place. Beyond the good practice of enforcing MFA when enter joining devices, when a user signs in to Windows 365 Link, the interactive authentication is against the device registration service. Having this policy in place ensures that the right MFA claim will be added to the user's token to satisfy any other conditional access policies you may have enforcing MFA in front of your other cloud resources. So if I look here, you'll see I have a policy called MFA for device join. I have it targeted to all users. Again, this could be set to a subset of users, but it would be the users who are using the Windows 365 link. The target resource is set to user actions and specifically register and join devices. You can configure network or conditions if you wanted. And then finally, if we look at the grant, you'll see that I have a grant access for require multi-factor authentication. Okay, the last thing you'll want to check is to make sure that you have SSO enabled for your cloud PCs. We do that by going to Devices, Windows 365, Provisioning Policies. Here we'll look into the provisioning policy I happen to have. And we'll go Edit. Down at the bottom, you'll see that use Microsoft Enter Single Sign-On. I have it checked. Let's uncheck it and go through the process of checking it. If you select it, hit Next, hit Update. That only saves the configuration. It doesn't apply it. To apply it, you click the Apply this configuration, select Enter Single Sign-On for all devices, and then you hit Apply. Please note, for cloud PCs that were created before April 2023, this may disconnect and or reboot the cloud PC as part of the application of the config change, and that can be impactful to end users. So you may want to do it during a maintenance window. Secondly, there could be some other lower level changes you may need to make in your AVD setup, depending on your environmental configuration, such as if your cloud PCs are hybrid joined. Please see the Windows 365 documentation on learn.microsoft.com for more detail, which will then take you off to the subsequent documentation in Windows 365 or AVD. Okay, now we have made sure our environment is ready to have Windows 365 linked devices enrolled and operating. The next thing would be to go through the unboxing experience. I have a video here that we can watch that will show that process. Now please don't blink because you may miss it, as it is very quick. Alright, here's a quick video that's going to show the 3 steps of the out-of-box experience for Windows 365 Link, which is connect to a network, accept EULA, and sign in. For this quick video, I'd already connected the device to the network via Ethernet, so I didn't have to choose a Wi-Fi network. So I accept the EULA next, and then I sign in. Here I'm using a 502 USB security key. So I enter my PIN when asked and touch the key. And at that point, the process of Entra joining and Intune automatic enrollment are happening. It takes about another minute to minute and a half from here before that process completes, and you should land on your cloud PC. All right, now that we've completed the setup process for a Windows 365 Link device, let's take a look how it shows up in Intune. Since the device runs a purpose-built version of Windows, it will show up next to other Windows devices in Intune. So if we go into Devices, Windows, you will see your Link devices show up with a device naming convention of WCPCD and then a string of characters. If we click into one of these, you'll see the familiar actions such as wipe, sync, restart, collect diagnostics. Some of these other actions are not applicable to the Link device, and we're working with the Intune team to improve the experience to either gray them out or make them not applicable. You can dive into the hardware details where you can see things like the serial number and operating system, as well as device compliance or configuration that may be targeted at it, which we'll cover a little bit more detail in a moment. You can also get access to recovery keys. Speaking of device configuration, let's check that out. So again, since the OS is Windows-based, the method to apply policies is very much the same as other Windows devices. It's just the number of policies that are actually applicable for the Link is greatly reduced compared to Windows. But if we go into Devices, Configuration, let's imagine you had a general configuration file that you were applying to all Windows devices, and that may get targeted at the Link. But if the policy is not applicable, it will show up as such. So for example, let's say I had a policy that was doing various things like above lock settings or some general experience settings, which are not applicable to the Link device. You'll see that in the report, it was successfully applied to the various cloud PCs, but deemed not applicable to the Link device. Now, if you wanted to, you could update your policies to add an exclusion filter for the Windows 365 Link device using the device filter that we had created earlier. Now, if there's particular policies you want to target only at the Link device, that operates also very similar as it would for other Windows. So, for example, we recommend that you set a particular privacy policy to allow the device's access to location services. This is what enables the Link device to understand its location to determine time zone automatically, so that correct time zone gets redirected to the cloud PC. So here's an example of the policy that's applying that. The configuration setting from the settings catalog was from the privacy CSP and let apps access location. Allow, I've assigned it to all devices, but with an include filter of Windows 365 linked devices using the device filter we mentioned above. If I view the report, you will see that for the cloud PCs themselves, it was deemed not applicable because of the filter, but then the policy was applied to the Windows 365 linked device. Similar to configuration policies, you can also apply compliance policies to the Windows 365 linked device. But given its smaller OS, not all of the settings are actually applicable. So here we'll take a quick look at a Windows 365 linked compliance policy. If I go to Properties, you'll see that I'm assigning it to all devices, but then using an include filter with the Windows 365 linked device filter we had created earlier. In terms of the compliance settings to use, it would be the device health settings, which are making a statement that BitLocker, Secure Boot, and Code Integrity are required, which again, as we had mentioned earlier, these security features are enabled by default and cannot be turned off on the Windows 365 linked device. And there we have the overview of the things you want to check in the environment, the unboxing process, and how Windows 365 Link looks and is managed within Intune.
Thank you for your time today, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the sessions.